My name is Rochelle. I work here at the Vermillion Public Library, and today we are going to learn about Istanbul. And my guest today is also my husband, and his name is Phil, and he is his amateur historian, I guess you would say, or that's what he would say. I would say he's a professional historian because he knows a lot. And he's very passionate about Istanbul and the Byzantine Empire, the Ottoman Empire, or maybe I think you're more interested in the Byzantine Empire, aren't you? Is that kind of more your fascination? Anyway, just to get a few things out of the way, I will be recording this program for anybody who has to leave in the middle of it or anything. We'll try and fit this within an hour, but Phil likes to talk a lot, so it's entirely possible this could go over. So that's what the recording will be for. If you have to leave right at 1 o'clock, we'll share the recording on our Facebook and YouTube pages so that you're able to catch what was said at the end. Otherwise, go ahead and if you ever had any questions, you can type them in the chat box, and I will keep an eye on that and interrupt him as I see fit to try and get him to answer any questions. But otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to Phil, and he's going to begin talking to us about Istanbul. Phil?
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to share my screen, or actually, I'm going to go ahead and I'll step in here. I'll share my screen in a minute. I have always been interested in history. I love reading about old times, old places. And at a certain point in my early 20s, there was a short story I read called Lest Darkness Fall. And it was a story about a man from the 1930s who finds himself back in the 4th century AD. And I kind of started wondering, like, I really like this idea of like alternate history. You know, it was kind of an interesting way to put a modern person into an old time. And I maybe wonder about the lived experience of being in these places. You know, you read a lot of history books, right? They tell you about people and they tell you about places, but you don't know what it feels like to be in the Colosseum, right? And so reading these sort of fictional novels kind of made me start wondering about that. And specifically about the Byzantine Empire. That was the thing that featured in Lest Darkness Fall by Elsbrog de Camp. Great book, hilarious book. And I got kind of interested in the Byzantine Empire through that. And one day I was at the library, or a local bookstore down at Midway Books in St. Paul, and I found this. Let me get this in the right place. But it was a short history of Byzantium by John Julius Norwich. And I was like, this book is great. It was one of my best histories I've ever read. It's not so forbidding as reading Decline and Fall by Gibbon, right? It was a lot more accessible, kind of an eye to the human side. It's like getting to chat with a diplomat of the times who has all the good gossip. And so reading that one book led to me ordering my first order on Amazon, actually, from the UK, the not so short history of Byzantium by John Julius Norwich, which is the full 3-volume version. I don't want to tell you how much I spent because it's a little bit embarrassing, but I just loved these books. And so one day I was walking underneath the Hennepin Bridge in Minneapolis, and there are retaining walls, in case the Mississippi gets a little wild and rises up to prevent flooding. And I was looking at those walls and I was like, I wonder if that's what it would feel like, looking up at these walls. Is what it would feel like to look up at the walls of Byzantium, around the walls of Constantinople. And I was like, why don't I just go there? So I moved back home. I worked for just under a year at the sawmill, saved up a bunch of money, got a one-way plane ticket, and found myself in Istanbul. And so I'm going to share some photos. It's not going to be a PowerPoint presentation. It's going to be very anecdotal. My wife's kind words to the contrary. I am definitely not a professional historian. I like the stories of peoples and places, but I don't have the rigor, right, to give you like the history of a place. So I just kind of want to share my experience, the things that I found interesting, and maybe give a compelling reason why you should go, or maybe even just read about it. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead, although that was a lot of ado. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. And start going through some of these photos. So one of the things about Istanbul that I think is really amazing, let me get this photo up. This is from my first trip. So it's not a tremendously great quality photo, but this is what I was really looking for. You have on one hand a municipal building for the local district, Iminonu, which I think I'm pronouncing right. And then you have a building that I never found out, there was no name attached to it. It's clearly very old. There's just stuff growing on it. And there is so much old stuff that, like, things that we would consider an ancient relic to be preserved in America is just like, well, it's just here, you know. It's not anything that we would, it's not anything to worry about there because there's just so much of it. It's a place that's very full of life. This is actually not too far from the main thoroughfare. The over to the right behind the building is actually where you could, there's, you know, beautiful old mosque, but it's just, there are just people living here amongst history. So Istanbul, which was Constantinople, which was Byzantium, and before that, there were people who'd been living there for thousands of years before history even began to be recorded. People have been living here because it's a great place to be for a very long time. And you can really feel that. It's, you know, an old place. It's a place that is, you know, full of life, full of commerce, you know, from large banks to, you know, people just selling, you know, like here, like selling fruit on the street, or selling fast food. And it's, you know, you'll have very modern buildings with very old buildings. Some of the buildings in here look like they're probably you know, from the 30s or 20s, next to buildings that were built just yesterday. It's also, and this is one of my favorite photos of Istanbul. So Istanbul is a city of the sea. You can find all sorts of seafood there because it is right on the Sea of Marmara. And actually, I'll pull up a map real quick. So this area here is old Constantinople. You can see the wall, the old wall that showed the boundaries of the city. And it's surrounded on two of its three sides because it's shaped like a triangle with water, which was great for defense. Now, there are all of these ships coming from the Black Sea, you know, from the Black Sea up here, all the way coming down out into Marmara, and then further on into the Aegean and the greater Mediterranean. It was historically very important, especially for the Russian Empire. And there's actually a treaty that was made between the Russian Empire and the Ottoman Empire, which gave the Russian Empire, the Russian ships, free access to passage through here, unregulated. And it's a treaty that, even though the two entities that created it have since disappeared, the Ottoman Empire ending in the 1920 or so, and the Russian Empire about the same time, the successor state of Turkey and then the Soviet Union and now Russia like that agreement still stands. And so it's interesting to, something that was decided, 150, 200 years ago still has the force of law. And it's a place where a lot of people, because it's a very big city, ferries, run people back and forth all of the time from one side to the other. You can see here in this photo, to give you a sense, this is the ancient city, which was, of course, one of like the great cities of antiquity. Close to 1 million people at different points lived in this area. Now Istanbul sprawls across the continents of Europe on one side and Asia on the other, and there's about 20 million people who live there. For perspective, I went to the Czech Republic right after I was in Istanbul, and there's somewhat less than 20 million people in the entirety of the Czech Republic. It's a very densely populated place. So one of the things you'll notice when you're in Turkey is this gentleman. You can see a face sort of looking down here. That is Ataturk. He is the founder of modern Turkey. Turkey was more or less set to be torn apart at the beginning of the 1920s in the aftermath of the First World War, because the Ottoman Empire was on the losing side of that. And he essentially coordinated a fight against everybody. He was sort of the only general who'd had any sort of success on the Ottoman side, and so he had the sort of political clout to unify everybody and fight back against the partition of Turkey and establish the modern republic. Consequently, his face is everywhere. It's like if it's just George Washington to the 10th degree. His face really is everywhere. Things are named after him everywhere. You can't escape him. So one of the other kind of features of Turkey, or Istanbul in particular, are the dogs. There are dogs everywhere. There are dogs and cats everywhere. Some of you may have even seen, there's a documentary, Kedi, about the cats of Istanbul. This kind of ties into a long-standing tradition in Islamic culture of being kind to animals. They're sort of, nobody owns these dogs. They're sort of the community's dogs. And so people, feed them and take care of them. And it's interesting because this isn't just a modern phenomenon. Was a 19th century British diplomat who talked about the neighborhood dog that, she was very friendly, very intelligent. And when she had a litter of puppies, sort of, fetching him and bringing him to her litter of puppies to share. They're very, very, integrated into the community. This, I think, we think about, tourism and bringing back knickknacks as being maybe a modern phenomena. This, I think, is a good example that people going to new places and bringing back stuff is not a new phenomenon. This is a obelisk, I believe Thutmose the Third of Egypt, and this was something that I believe Valentinian had shipped from Egypt to Constantinople on a boat. So I just want you to think about that, in the 4th century AD, somebody, wanted their little relic, their little knickknack to bring back from Egypt. And if you were a Roman emperor, you could absolutely just bring the biggest chunk of stone that you could get your hands on and then set it up in the middle of, the Imperial racing track, where it still stands to this day. Food. I don't know a lot about food. I'm a terrible cook. I don't necessarily have like a refined palate. I can't tell you if something has a hint of cinnamon or a dash of rosemary, but I know what I like, and I really like Turkish food. It's very simple. You can see in this picture there's some flatbread and some hummus, which is a very common thing around sort of the Eastern Mediterranean, right? You'll find that in cuisine all over the place there. And of course the kebab. One of my favorite things, which is in the little glass, which is being held with some ice to keep it chilled, is raka. Now raka is a clear liquor. It's an aniseed-based liquor, but when you add water to it, it turns it from clear to cloudy. And so it's, I believe, like in Turkish, it's sometimes referred to as lion's milk, right? Because it gives you courage. It's very similar to ouzo or arak, if you're familiar with those liqueurs, but it has a very black licorice taste to it. And mixing with water on a really hot day, it's an incredibly refreshing drink to have. And of course, Turkish coffee, which is very, very, very strong. I remember the first time I had it, I did not know that there were grounds at the bottom of that cup. And so when I got down to the bottom, I just sort of kicked it back. That was a lesson I will never forget. I was picking those grounds out of my teeth for a couple of days. So yeah, that's absolutely one of my favorite things, just to sit down after a meal in Turkey and like having that little coffee like at the end of the meal. Like I said, I don't have a refined sense of dining, but I know what I like. There are so many parks. I think that's maybe sometimes the benefit of having living in a place where you had an imperial family live, because of course the imperial family is going to want to have nice stuff to go use too. In fact, this park I think was possibly originally a part of the palace complex, but just beautiful trees, and on a nice day like this you just see people out and about everywhere. So this is the Aya Sophia, and you'll notice there are a lot of people. It's the thing you can't escape. I've been in summer and I've been in winter, and it doesn't really matter. There's always going to be a lot of people in Istanbul. It's really it's a location that I think a lot of people want to go see. One of my favorite things is sitting and listening to the salesman. You'll find people like trying to pull you into a rug shop or pull you into a restaurant. And these people, they know like 10 different languages. It's incredible, but they'll sit, and if you don't respond to something they say in French, they'll switch to Russian. And if you don't respond to Russian, they'll switch to English. If you don't respond to English, they'll switch to German, right? Like everybody's trying to make a sale. It's a little overwhelming sometimes, especially because I feel like, or at least in my case, coming from a very small town, I wasn't used to that level of aggressiveness from people trying to make a sale. So this is the milestone. I can't remember the Roman name for it, but this was the central location of the empire when Constantinople was the capital of the Roman Empire, and everything was measured from this milestone. And so you can see they've sort of erected a modern milestone showing distances to Babylon or Tokyo. It always makes me think of the little signposts in MASH. This is the Gallaudet Tower. So this is actually not in, I guess, what you would call like Istanbul proper, but it is right over on the other side. So right here, this is where Gallaudet Tower is. This is the part of the city that was mostly populated by Venetians, Genoans during the Middle Ages, even after the Ottoman conquest. And so That's why it's definitely doesn't necessarily look like it belongs. It looks more like it belongs in Italy, but I unfortunately don't have any pictures of it. I don't think I had my camera that day, the day we went up, but it's a really long climb, but it is well worth the trip. People fish, just it's a thing. I feel weird about the fishing because I see a lot of, well, look, I used to live in San Diego, and every time it rained, because of the runoff, they closed down the beaches because of pollution. I can't imagine, how much pollution is possibly in these waters, but people seem to be fine with it. No one's falling over dead. No one's forbidding it, so maybe it's okay. But I personally am a little leery of it. Again, this is right outside of the Cora Church, which I'll take a look at a little much more detail later. But it's a good example of, on one hand, you have to the right a very old cemetery, and to the left, you've got like a reasonably modern, up-to-date house. It's just a collision of times. And again, here, like it's, you're constantly seeing different time periods bump into one another. That wall, it's the walls of Constantinople. They were built in the 4th century AD, and of course, there's just a place where kids play. It's just a place where people live. And I think that's actually, like, again, I felt like it should all be in a museum, but for most of these people, this is just where they live. This is just how they live their life. This is the Bulgarian Patriarch is housed in this church. Constantinople is, if I remember correctly, it has the Bulgarian, Armenian, and Greek Orthodox patriarchs all are based out of this city. So down here, this is looking off of the bridge where everyone was fishing. Down in this area, they were beginning to build a new bridge. And in 2010 or 11, they discovered a Byzantine naval facility. So even today, again, it's just, they're still finding rather immense structures from antiquity because it's just been built over so many times. That's Gallaudet Tower from a little bit closer. This was a mosque. It was quite old. I believe it was created. The funding to build it was provided by a contemporary of Suleiman the Magnificent. So that's what, 16th century, 1500, 1600. I don't remember the exact dates. But this is a living and breathing place of worship. So we weren't actually allowed to take photos once inside. And I think that's something that's really interesting. Like, again, like places of great antiquity that are still being used as sacred places. And I think that's actually one of my favorite things about Istanbul is the degree to which people, the people are really what make it. People are very friendly. It's constantly things are happening. And especially if you're like me and from a small town kid, like it's just energizing. This is a fine gentleman. I've lost my notebook where I had his name written down. But I love going in and eating. Like I said, not a fine cuisine person, but the kind of food that's just regular, kind of considered fast food fare is delicious to me. You'll see up there on the top, kofta, kebab, and Iskender. Iskender is like my favorite meal. Iskender kebab. It's like a tomato sauce with chilies and yogurt and pita and kebab, and it's just absolutely delicious. I have ordered things in Turkey. I didn't know what they were because there was no translation available on the menu. I've never had a bad experience. And I will say I'm a very shy and fussy eater. Some more of the dogs. All right, so, okay. So this is the Aya Sophia. So the Aya Sophia is, if there is a place that kind of symbolizes Istanbul, it's the Aya Sophia. Aya Sophia has been a Catholic church, an Orthodox church, and a mosque and a museum, and just recently has become a functioning mosque again. So after Ataturk came to power and established the modern Turkish state, they just converted it into a museum. That's sort of recently changed because of basically domestic politics there. But you can still go. I took this photo from up on top of a restaurant. I don't remember anything about the food. I was just strictly interested in getting my perfect photo of the Aya Sophia. So the Aya Sophia was built in the reign of Justinian the Great. As you can imagine, getting called the Great is definitely, you earn that, right? So Justinian was a very ambitious fellow. He was born a peasant in, I believe, what is modern day Bulgaria. His uncle became emperor and sent for him to come to the capital. He got very well educated and eventually became the emperor of the Eastern Roman Empire, or Byzantine Empire, as we say. So this is a guy with no little bit of ambition. You don't work your way up from, working in the mud to being the most powerful man in Europe without ambition. Unfortunately, ambition made him a lot of enemies, culminating in the Nika riots. So in the Nika riots, the two main, we'll just call them gang factions for the sake of simplicity, united against him. In the Hippodrome, where all of the races were held, they started shouting victory. Ostensibly, they were, yelling Nika, victory, to the charioteers who were racing, but in reality, it sort of morphed into victory over you, Justinian, and they began rioting. And at a certain point, Justinian's wife, Theodora, had to stop him because Justinian and his generals were ready to just abandon the city. The riots were so bad. And Theodora said, I have worked my way up from being nothing but a stage actress to becoming the Empress of Rome. Like, we are not leaving, and that is not how we're doing business. And so everybody else felt kind of ashamed that, she was putting them in their place and showing much more bravery. And they stayed. The riot was put down, but a lot of things were destroyed. So the original Aya Sophia was built by Constantine the Great, who founded Constantinople. And when the Aya Sophia, it came time to rebuild it, rather than just simply rebuild it, he wanted the greatest church in Christendom. And so he summoned two Greek architects, and he said, I want it built, and I want it built in like 3 to 5 years. Don't just get it done. And they essentially invented an entirely new style of architecture. Other churches didn't look like this before the Aya Sophia. They used a series of arches to support the weight of the central dome. And when it was finally finished rapidly, and I don't remember if it was around 3 or 5 years. It went up very quickly. Justinian walked in and is supposed to have said, Solomon, I have surpassed you. The central dome, you'll notice that there are windows kind of going all the way around that central dome. And the effect is something like having the dome being hung from heaven. Like when you are inside, it feels like, and I don't know if pictures really do it justice, but it really feels like the dome isn't sitting on the church, but that it is hanging from heaven over you. I'm going to go ahead and bring up some photos. As you walk in to the Aya Sophia, you realize that this is a 1,500-year-old church, and you can see where just people walking have worn down the stone over the years. Like, it's like silly putty, like they've just smoothed it out. You actually have to be kind of careful. In fact, this is how you get up to the balcony that goes around the upper part of the Aya Sophia, and it's extremely slippery, and you have to walk very carefully. If you have slick shoes like I did the first time I went, you definitely will fall. I definitely did. So you'll see on the right, this is inside, that there's this enormous structure inside. They were renovating the dome at the time. And it was really disappointing because I really wanted the full effect. And so I went in about 2007. I went back again in 2014 with my wife, Rochelle. And I was really excited that I was finally going to get not have to look at this, right? I was like, okay, surely they're finished. It's been like almost 10 years. And what happened was they moved it to the other side. So I have seen the full scale of Aya Sophia, but like one half at a time, unfortunately. So what are the things they did? So a lot of the pillars inside of the Aya Sophia are from old temples. It was one of the ways they were able to do it so quickly. They just took like any old pagan temples that were kind of lying around. A lot of them had been repurposed as churches. In fact, the what is it? Not the Pantheon, the Parthenon was actually, if I remember correctly, the Church of the Virgin Mary in Athens, for example, for quite a bit of time. But so they took a lot of pillars and building materials from these old pagan structures. And for example, these bronze doors that are a part of the Aya Sophia came from a temple in Ephesus. So it's it's interesting to see, and I'm curious if that has something to do with the uniqueness of the architecture, because they were trying to figure out, well, how can we easily incorporate all of these different elements? Now, since Aya Sophia was converted into a mosque, there's a lot of things in it that are still there that are mosque, remnants of that time. Or again, now, of course, it's being used functionally. So, for example, this box here, this is where the Ottoman Sultan would come to listen to Friday prayers. It was a way for him to participate in worship, but also still maintain a separation between his subjects. And if you look down, that is to the minbar, where they would go up and the imam would speak during Friday prayers. And of course, everything has been slightly orientated. It's a little off center because, of course, when it was built, it was not aimed at pointing to Mecca, whereas it was converted somewhat in order to accommodate that aspect of Muslim worship. There's these beautiful, they also added these beautiful Iznik tiles inside. So this definitely is not a part of the original Byzantine Roman construction. It really is a layered construction. It is no longer a purely Byzantine or a purely Ottoman place. It's a product of its history. And this is a smaller example of Iznik tile. Iznik tile is a very distinctive, that very vibrant blue you see. These tiles were made. So Iznik, you might be more familiar as Nicaea, which is the place, of course, where they established the Nicene Creed for Christianity. And this is an awful photo, again, from my first trip when I had a terrible camera. And you can see that light shining in from the windows, and I don't think it does it justice. It's not the same as seeing it, but it gives a sense of that lightness, even though it's from the outside, a very almost brooding and squat structure, but on the inside, it feels very light and floating and airy. Also, I am really glad I don't have to do any work that high up, because that terrifies me. This is, I've never been able to figure out if he was actually buried here. I don't think he was, but this is at least a nameplate of Enrico Dandolo, who was the Doge of Venice during the Fourth Crusade in 1204. The Venetians were taking some crusaders to go invade Egypt, and somehow Enrico managed to, I don't know, this guy was like the greatest salesman of all time. He was like, I hear you say you want to invade Egypt, but why don't we invade Constantinople instead? And so instead of invading Muslim Egypt, they ended up in Christian Constantinople and conquering the city. It didn't look like the battle was going to go their way. Constantinople, of course, is well defended by walls on all sides, even where it's surrounded by water. And the story goes that old Enrico, who was 80 and blind at the time, ordered his ship to ground itself ashore up against the battlements, and he leapt out of the boat, stuck the flag, the standard of the Venetian military and the Venetian Navy, into the ground, and it so inspired his troops that they were able to overcome the Byzantines and conquer the city. And hence, the 12th Crusade is the Fourth Crusade is in some ways the most ignominious of all the Crusades. All right. And as my wife noted, I do like to talk a lot, and I see we got about 20 minutes left. So I'm going to try to move along. I'm going to pause just ever so briefly. If anybody has any questions, please go ahead and speak up. Or Rochelle, has anything come into the chat?
Not yet, no.
Okay.
But it's okay if we go over a little.
Okay.
You've got a lot of information you've got to squeeze out.
Yes. So I really want to make sure to hit the highlights. So just real quick, I would like to talk about the mosaics that are inside of the Aya Sophia. So here is one mosaic. So this is in the entryway. This is not my photo. I wanted to get a good one, but this is a mosaic commemorating both the dedication of Constantinople on the right by Constantine, and the church itself of Aya Sophia on the left with Justinian, sort of consecrating or dedicating these constructions to Christ and the Virgin Mary, like showing that it is that these are, it's a Christian city, and this church is dedicated to the glory of God. So mosaics, as I'm sure you know what a mosaic is, but I really feel like the Byzantines had, I think, the finest and most amazing mosaics. They're incredibly detailed. They're rich. They have like a degree of shading and artistry that is, it's almost like it's like imagining somebody painting, but of course it's actually just tiny little stones, just carefully placed one by one, onto a surface. In fact, I think that's even more evident in this next bit. So a lot of these mosaics, they have some damage, but the only reason they're actually preserved is when Aya Sophia became a mosque, they were plastered over due to the Islamic prohibition on the depiction of people, especially in a mosque. So this has been a little bit damaged. It's Christ with Virgin Mary, and I'm pretty sure that is John. My Greek is non-existent, but I'm pretty sure that is John on his right. And so to look at a little bit, kind of a closer up image of that, I just wanted to take a sec to really appreciate, the detail in this depiction. I'm not particularly religious, but I think this is beautiful art, and I think not just art in the sense, I don't appreciate it as art purely in the technique or like it looks beautiful, but I think it's truly serene and inspires a degree of contemplation in something greater than myself, right? Like I really feel like this is an artistic depiction of the divine that invokes a sense of wonder and awe. And imagine like these are all over the church. So imagine like actually there were Vikings who were ruling in Russia, right, who came down as emissaries and they were shown into this church. Can you imagine going from a log cabin somewhere on the Don in Russia, and then you're ushered into this church and you're shown these pictures? Like I can't even imagine like what that would feel like. And even to me as a modern, somebody who's got access to Hollywood blockbusters, I can still just look at this and just appreciate, just how momentous this is. So I want to definitely be able to hit the Blue Mosque. So the Blue Mosque sits right across. So if you turned around, if you were in this park in the middle, you would be about equidistant between the Aya Sophia and the Blue Mosque. And if you turned around from where this picture is taken, you would see Aya Sophia, and right there. So the Blue Mosque is properly the Sultan Ahmed Jami, or Sultan Ahmed Mosque, which is who built it. It is a huge tourist attraction. It's very beautiful. And again, like a lot of these places, a functioning mosque. So when I first arrived in Turkey, I literally stepped off the tram downtown, and literally somebody was there going like, have you seen the Blue Mosque? Now this was his way of, getting me to go to his shop and buy a rug later. But like, it was kind of a cool way to like just walk into a city and have to go, have you seen this beautiful thing? Like, no, I haven't. Come right this way. And so he took me up to the Blue Mosque. I did not have a wide camera lens, so this is a photo I grabbed off the internet, which I think captures it a little bit more. So this is sort of a fusion of Ottoman Islamic and Byzantine styles. Some people feel that it's sort of derivative of the Aya Sophia. I think that the sort of like the fine detail work, the inclusion of the Arabic calligraphy in the motifs and design, I think just really makes it, it's its own thing, right? Like this isn't, it comes after, but in the same way that like a child is its own being, and it's, yes, it's a part, its parents are a part of it, but it's its own individual creature. This is its own thing, like these mosques. This is my lovely wife, Rochelle. You'll notice she has her head covered. It's one of the things you have to do because, again, it's a functioning sacred space. When I showed up wearing shorts, and so I had to wear basically a beach towel with some Velcro as sort of a makeshift dress or kilt around my lower half in order to go in, because they don't want you showing your knees. This was a lesson I learned, and definitely any other time I've tried to visit a mosque, I make sure I've got pants on. I apologize. So this is a little bit oversaturated. I was just learning how to edit photos at this time, so I like to really bump up the color. So this is not a photo accurate depiction of the inside of the Blue Mosque, but I think it does capture some of what it feels like. There's a lot of color, and it's sort of overwhelming because every time you zero in on one place, you can really just like look at one little place in these designs, and it's intricate and detailed. And then you zoom back out, the whole effect is itself also overwhelming. It works on both the miniature and the macro, right? All right. And then, so the Topkapı is the Ottoman, uh, I wouldn't really call it a palace. It's more like the palace structure, because it's not just one particular building. It's a series of gates and buildings. In fact, the 19th century British diplomats would refer to it as the Sublime Porte. And if I'm remembering my Turkish correctly, that's essentially a fancy British translation of Topkapı. But it's a series of gates. And like as you go through these entrances, you draw closer towards the center of imperial power. So the further in you're able to go, was a sign of your importance, right? Like if you were able to work all the way to the center and have an audience with, the Sultan, or if you only dealt with his ministers, or if, you were just dropping off a shipment of carrots, right, for the staff. Even inside, there's, this is, again, like you're just constantly going to be running into ruins. What is this? I don't know. Like, I feel like if this was in America, like we would have this blocked off. There would be archaeological digs. We'd be trying to figure out like what kind of evidence is there. And here it's just no big deal. So again, here's another entrance. This is going into sort of the central part of the Topkapı. This is where you'll see more of the living quarters. There's also gardens inside. So I mean, this was a place, especially if you were a part of the imperial family, especially later in the Ottoman period, you would never leave, right? You were sort of sequestered away a lot of the time, particularly if you were part of the harem, which I know sounds very exotic, but I actually don't think it was particularly exotic. So this is sort of looking out. It was very good to be the Sultan. It meant you could pick the best possible place to live with the best possible views. And even today, it's just a gorgeous view to look out over, Marmara and the Bosphorus. These are some living structures. So this is places where people just lived, right? Like, on one hand, it's a palace, and we think of pomp and circumstance, but they're places where people just had their lives. And particularly if you were a part of the harem, you just, like, this is just what you knew. In fact, some of us probably feel very similar to being sequestered in the harem in this year of our pandemic. This going on now, we're almost at a full year. I know I've been working from home for a while now, and boy, yeah, I don't know. I wish I had some nice big couches like that to just sprawl out on while I worked. This I snapped a picture of. So most of the structure, it's definitely very much in the Ottoman style. In the architecture and the decorations. This is clearly like very much like a watercolor from Western Europe, maybe like from Italy. And I think the Ottoman sultans were rulers of a world empire, and so they were able to attract. So if they thought something looked nice, right, like they were able to just kind of like reach out and grab it. I think it gives a sense of how cosmopolitan they were, right? Like that they were people who like lived in the world and not just trying to attract, not just working within their own kind of cultural world, but also like reaching out and being aware of what was going on in Europe, not just politically and militarily, but also being aware of what was happening, culturally as well. This is me just standing there like a goober, taking a photo of myself with my lovely wife, who's not a goober, in a mirror. That's all. Again, so this is inside that sort of imperial space, in the palace space where people lived. And it just really I felt very sad being there because it is so empty. It's not a museum in the sense that there's a lot of relics to look at, although there are in other parts of the palace. But in the parts where people lived, it's just empty, and you just sort of go from empty room to empty room. And it's sort of sad because it feels like a place where, I mean, I know it needs to be preserved for historical purposes, but I kind of wish they were able to populate it with actors, sort of in the same way that like Old Town Alexandria, for example, you have people there who are able to sort of speak to what the living experience was. Now it's just, yeah, it's a little bit sad. Lots of things shuttered up. But what a really just beautiful place to live. Oh, and then last shout out to my wife. This is just a little inscription. Again, just trying to, butter up my wife. And then also, if you look at the very, very top of the structure, you'll see the Imperial, hopefully I'm not messing up this pronunciation, the Tugra. So the early sultans were, they were not literate, and so they would often affix, as a signature to decrees, they would attach, they would just do a thumbprint, right? And so as the Ottomans got more and more wealthy and more powerful, of course, on one hand, you want to hang on tradition, but you also want to sort of show your wealth and power, and literacy was exceptionally important. So they developed these tugras, or imperial seals, which are, so that is the name of, let's see who that was, Abdul Hamid II. That's his name in Arabic calligraphy, but it's styled, just exceptionally styled, to sort of evoke that thumbprint, the swirls of a fingerprint. I love that. All right. Okay, so I'm coming up on 12:55. I have a few things, so if anyone needs to drop, I'm really sorry. I'm so long-winded. I will try to sort of wrap this up as quickly as possible. Again, I just want to pause if anyone has any questions, corrections. I am definitely not an expert in any way. Okay. So just real quick, like I said, kind of at the beginning, one of the things that really got me interested in Istanbul was, walking along and looking at that retaining wall on the Mississippi. And so this is the wall. These are the famous land walls of Constantinople. There's actually 3 parts to them, but this was the best photo I took, and I really like it. I climbed up on them at one point, which I don't think I'm supposed to have done, but I could not resist. These were the walls that let Constantinople be the center of a world empire and be so resilient as the capital of a world empire for 1,500 years. They were able, the Bulgars literally went on a tear through what is now Greece, just looting and pillaging, conquering all the way through. And this army, this unstoppable force, just rolled up, looked at the wall, kind of trotted up and down a couple of times, and they just turned around. They did, they were they just didn't know what to do with this. It literally just took until the invention of gunpowder for these walls to become ineffective, which is how when the Ottomans took over under Mehmed, the Conqueror, that's what it was. They just battered these things to the ground, but it took that technological innovation. For 1,000 years, this was the pinnacle of military defense. This was the greatest thing ever. So I climbed up along, so you can see this is along the ocean wall. There was a part where it had kind of broken down, and you could sort of climb up the dirt here. And so I climbed up and I found a little encampment where it looked like people had created a small shelter. They'd had a fire. There's kind of some garbage lying around, and it's just looking right out over, off these walls that are 1,000 years old. And a little later, I was walking down along this path, and I saw a gentleman sort of, sprint across the road, and a woman lowered down a ladder. And it was they looked like a middle-aged couple, and they, didn't look dirty or anything, but they were clearly living, at least somewhat homeless, in a small little part of these, medieval battlements, right? That they were providing refuge to these people. I don't know what to think about it. I don't know how to feel about it, but I just sort of am in awe and wonder of it. That people live amongst this still. And again, as an American, like, where old is 50 years, like that this is 1,000, 1,500 years old. So I just wanted to kind of run through a few things. So there is an archaeological museum in Istanbul, and if you're ever there, it is the bee's knees. It is wonderful. There is so much history in Istanbul that they literally just kind of leave it lying around. There are all these various bits of pillars, capstones and sarcophaguses. They're just outside because there's just no room, and like they're not important enough to take care of. And like at a certain point, there's so much, you just got to make some decisions, right? Like what to save and what to not worry about. I mean, statues, heads, I would love to have this in my garden, right? But like, and here, you can go and kind of just sit and have a cup of coffee amongst this just sort of abandoned history. I don't have anything really to go with this other than I thought this looked kind of like Elvis. And it made me laugh a lot when I saw this statue at the Archaeological Museum. I loved seeing evidence that mutton chops existed in the Hellenistic age. You can see other examples of like the city's history. So this is fitted stone pipes for running water through the city. We think of plumbing as kind of a modern thing, but like, great cities, a city with 1 million people, like they had to kind of figure things out back then. And it's kind of interesting to be able to see like the tangible evidence of like how they did that. So this is the Great Chain. So they would put this up in front of, I apologize, the Golden Horn, to prevent ships coming in. That way they only had to defend one side of the city. They didn't have to worry about defending this, putting people on this wall to defend. And so they would just had this chain, they would pull it up, and ships just could not break through this chain. It was just huge. Of course, Mehmet the Conqueror, who did finally conquer, for the Ottomans, the city, the way he got around that was so the chain was right here, and he just told his navy, well, the solution is clearly just take your ships up here and drag them over this hill and just drop them into the water over here. When you have power of life and death over people, you can come up with those kind of creative and innovative solutions and be sure that people are going to carry them out. One of the things I really liked about the Archaeological Museum was they had these examples of what statues looked like in antiquity, that they weren't just white marble, they were painted, and that there was a real festiveness to religion, right? Like I think sometimes we imagine all of history to look a little bit like the Victorians, where I think it was a lot more fun than most people imagine it was. I think if you've ever read about medieval pilgrimages or holy days. Chaucer, obviously, right, with the Canterbury Tales. People were kind of getting down and having a good time, in the midst of their religious celebrations. Again, just more stuff there was just not room for. So this is real quick. This is the Alexander Sarcophagus. It was used by the King of Sidon, but was probably originally constructed for Alexander because it features him very prominently. That is him on his horse Bucephalus. You'll note he doesn't have stirrups because back then you just hopped on the horse and you gripped real hard with your knees and hope nobody knocked you off in the middle of a battle. That was how they did it, and and so, and again, like you can just barely see hints of color that have faded over time in this photo, and here they've sort of reconstructed what this would have looked like. I think that I really like this again because we think of the past as being sort of desaturated. I know I have continually imagined World War II in black and white for most of my life. And the rest of the past is no exception. Or you imagine like a white toga or something. But the past was Technicolor, man. It was just a bright, lively place. And again, like here, more just beautiful coffins. Like I mean, I don't even know how old these are, right? And they're just sitting outside. There's just so much stuff, and I think that's. I think that's the thing about Istanbul more than anything else is it's just so much stuff. I could keep talking for honestly another hour. I am not even touching on like the more modern aspects of Istanbul that I think are great. You can, if you like, I mean, I guess if you like going to a discotheque and dancing, like they have that. They have like a vibrant nightlife. It is a world-class city. It's just a great place. You can go over, sit in a cafe on the Asian side in a neighborhood that used to house a convent that the Empress Theodora set up for reformed prostitutes, and now it's very famous for the cucumbers that people grow in their gardens there. It's just it's an incredibly dense place of history, and I love it very much. And I think I'm just going to go ahead and wrap up there. I don't know if there's anybody who has any questions, or if there was something I didn't get to that you'd like me to talk about. I am more than happy to do so. I'll go ahead and stop sharing.
Most of my visits, thank you, Phil, this is really interesting. I spent most of my visits in Turkey in the 80s on business, but my last visit there was in 92. I managed to create a surprise 40th birthday trip for my wife. She didn't know where she was going until she got on the aircraft at London Airport.
Wow.
But anyway, when we got there, our favorite things were the Roman aqueduct, which you probably remember.
Yep.
Like you, I don't like heights, but we walked across it. And as you remember, it's about 20 feet wide. It's about 150 feet above a busy highway. And the people were...
I didn't walk on it, actually. So you have one on me.
Well, I would only walk on it when it emptied out in the evening, because people just strolled across it with total disregard for the height. And I walked, I was able to walk right across the middle when no one else was there, but I wouldn't go anywhere near the edge of it. But people were coming across in hordes with total disregard. I also loved the place that, of course, the aqueduct fed, which was the what do they call them? The storage tanks.
The cistern. Was it
the cisterns underneath the bazaar?
Yeah.
It was great to go down there.
Yeah, the Basilica cistern. I love that it used to just be something. So for just to kind of back up, so the cisterns are huge. I mean, it's not like a well. It is. It's like a cavern with pillars, and it's huge. And it used to be there was just
boats to get around in it.
Yeah. And there was just and it used to be, before it became open to the public, it was just some guy's basement, right? Like he would just go down there and like, man, where's he getting all that fresh fish? You know, you just go down there.
We would go to the bazaar very early in the mornings when they were just washing the streets in the bazaar, and they'd open up a little manhole, and the guy would drop a bucket down. And I realized that the rope he was using was hugely long, and they were just dropping a bucket down into the cistern about 40 feet below, and bring up a bucket of water to do their cleaning, and then close the manhole up. It was intriguing.
And it's so amazing that, right, that Roman infrastructure, right, with not necessarily anyone maintaining it actively, it's still working, right?
Absolutely. We also managed to bribe this little kid to take us up onto the roof of the bazaar.
Oh, wow.
And there are all sorts of businesses up there. They've got foundries up there, and mills weaving carpets, which they pretend come from somewhere else. And but the most fabulous view of the mosques as well from up on top of the bazaar. Yeah, that was fun.
So I never went. So I've been to the covered bazaar. I was going to get there, but I talked too much, so I didn't get to it. I hate shopping. I just, people were like, oh, it's the oldest mall in existence. I'm like, well, I hate the mall. Why would I want to go there? So I went to the covered bazaar because my wife really wanted to go shopping. I find sometimes the shopping to be a little emotionally draining in Turkey because of the expectation of the haggling, right? Like, I was like, I just want to give you money and move on. We don't need to establish a relationship. I have to be in the mood for it. But the Egyptian bazaar, there was a gentleman who tried to get me to go there, and it was really weird. Most of the time you get like the guy giving you the sales pitch, like, oh, come to my friend, he's got a rug shop, right? Like, and you're like, oh, all right, whatever, I'll go along with this. And you go, and they give you apple tea, and they give you backgammon, want to play backgammon, and then they want to sell you a $3,000 rug. But this guy, the guy who tried to get me to the Egyptian bazaar, it felt really sketchy, and I kind of was hearing some gunshots, and I was like, nah. And so I have a little bit of a bias against the Egyptian bazaar.
Is there someone else waiting to chat? I see a little number one against chat.
I'm so sorry.
I think Anna made a comment. She said, this was great. I especially enjoyed all your anecdotal stories and observations on Elvis and more.
Yes, Hellenistic Elvis is my favorite. And I apologize. I mean, I'm really anecdotes is what I got. Again. Me
too.
Yeah,
I was lucky enough to spend most of my career working all across the Middle East, but I think Turkey, and in particular Istanbul, was perhaps for me the most favorite. Yeah. Iraq was fun. Iran was fun. Fun in my own sense of the world. I traveled to Iraq and Iran when they were at war with each other, which was exciting to say the least. But back then I thought I was immortal. But Istanbul, there's a magic about Istanbul. You can understand why so many spy novels were written around Istanbul, because at the time, as you say, with the only way that the Russians could get their Black Fleet out of the Black Sea and into the Mediterranean through Marmara was to go down the Bosphorus.
Right.
That the Russians royally upset Turks at one stage because they insisted on sending their submarines through. They're submerged, which, to say the least, was a bit risky.
Yes.
With all the ferries going backwards and forwards, and there are atomic submarines chugging up and down there with just a snorkel sticking out, with a periscope sticking out the top. And they tried to get around it at one stage by putting more chains. The Turks tried putting chains and nets at each end of the Bosphorus to deter the submarines from going through undetected. Because they knew that virtually every country in the world had some government official, basically a spy, who had a little apartment which overlooked the Bosphorus, and they're all sitting there with binoculars watching the ships go backwards and forwards. That was the way you found out where the fleet was and when they were going in and out.
Yeah, and even you were talking about how dangerous it was with the submarines. Like a friend of mine was telling me, like she's from Istanbul, and you'd like wake up sometimes and like you'd hear a big explosion. You're like, well, another Russian freighter ran aground. Like not navigating super well. Yeah, I can't even imagine like worrying about a nuclear submarine.
You were probably there when they had built the tunnels and the bridges over the Bosphorus. None of those were built when I was traveling there.
Even from the time I was there in 2007 to 2014, like the amount of construction that had occurred. Which is it's the Erdogan miracle, right? Like just keep building stuff, and don't worry about the bill later. Like let's just keep building.
Yes, and you are absolutely right about their reverence for Kemal Ataturk. Everywhere. Even I noticed in the watch shops, if you go to a watch shop in Turkey, all the watches, they don't have them running. The ones that sit in the window, I think the time is always set to 20 minutes after 2, because that's when Kemal Ataturk died.
Right.
So there's a tradition that they watches that aren't running are set to the time of his death.
Wow.
You said that I couldn't find my Turkish tea.
Oh, there it is.
Does this look familiar?
Oh, well done.
Oh yeah. Very nice.
This is just in my cupboard, sitting right behind me here. As I say, if I'd been a little more time, I'd have gotten out my tea. But I've got my chai glass and its saucer here, ready to go.
Absolutely, they're very typical of all the Middle Eastern countries, aren't they, Cindy? A glass cup filled to the brim with scorching hot tea. You develop calluses on your finger and thumb so that you don't burn yourself, and there's a half an inch of sugar in the bottom. Just intriguing. You have to have 3 of them before you can start doing business. And my agent, who came to London, he would bring his whole Turkish coffee brewing kit with him because he could never get the coffee he wanted outside of Turkey. So he brought it all with him and made it himself.
Wow. I was just going to we're sharing some artifacts. So I think technically this was illegal, but it's not actually a stone, but it's a bit of brick and some mortar off of the Theodosian walls. I feel a little bit bad.
Thank you for feeling on the library's program here. Thank you, Phil.
It's bad, but it's not that bad.
No, I have a shelf full of things that I shouldn't have.
Yeah. This was wonderful. It was fun. As I say, I lived in Izmir, but we visited. We had a school also at Üsküdar in Istanbul. So we would visit there and had friends there and so on. Also in Talosin and Gaziantep. But so it was fun to take a tour back to Istanbul.
Yeah. Cindy, was the air base you mentioned at Incirlik?
Chile.
Yeah. I remember Incirlik, but I didn't go to that one.
Incirlik,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It was across the bay from our school. We could sit in our buildings on the top floor and watch them build it.
Yeah. Oh wow. Yeah,
Turkey is sorry.
No, I was just saying I really wanted to get stationed there at one point when I was in the Navy.
A friend of mine from Vermillion.
Yes.
A high school classmate of mine was stationed at Yalova, which is outside of Istanbul, was a Navy base. His former wife is still living here in Vermillion, and we traveled back and forth. It was sort of fun. Nobody else could figure out how I could have a friend from high school also in Turkey when they couldn't figure out where South Dakota was.
Phil, when you were in Istanbul, I don't know how long you were there, but did you get around in the Dolmush system, the Dolmush Taxi? Huge old American sedans which were like communal taxis. You halfway between a bus and a taxi, and you'd stop them and you'd get in. There'd be 3 other people going somewhere, and you'd get on and off.
No, the closest I've experienced to that was the tuk-tuks in Thailand, which is its own interesting experience. We took a taxi, Rochelle and I did, and it was like most taxis in Europe. We just made a point of kind of like looking down and busying ourselves and trying not to pay attention to how close we were to the cars we were passing. But it was a newer vehicle. No, we didn't experience what you were talking about. When I went, I was very cheap, and I very disinclined to ever pay for a taxi. So I walked and took the train. In fact, the first time I went down the central street from the tip out to the wall, and then turned south and walked around, on the sea on the Marmara side.
Yep. Back
and
to
then
Topkapı, presumably.
And then when I took my wife there, I forced her, because I wanted to say I'd walked around the whole city more or less.
Do the rest
we went down the central. Yeah, we went to the north and came back down the other way. I was trying to look up to see how many miles that is, but it's blister inducing. Let's put it that way.
It's sorry at the end of it.
Well, and just real quick, so I unfortunately, I wish I didn't, but I have a coworker who works in Alaska. The only time she had available to meet with me today was at 1:30. So I am going to need to drop off.
Yep.
Just real quick, if there was anybody else who had any other questions, please go ahead while we have a chance. And if nothing comes up, I just want to say, if you're Cindy, if you'd like a fun, I guess, trick back to not so much the turkey you remember, but maybe a little bit older turkey. I highly recommend. I've read about Ottoman history. I think it's interesting, but I'm not really know much about it. But I love the Inspector Yasheem mysteries.
I have heard of that.
They're wonderful. I think there's about 4 or 5 of them in the series.
But I have not seen it. You have it at the library, Rosha?
I don't believe we do, but I can look up and see if I can get them. I know people have gotten them through interlibrary loan before through here, but I don't think we have them here.
Yeah, they're books that will make you hungry, because Yasheem is constantly cooking, and
I love the food.
Oh, I know, it's so great.
Yes, to die for.
And if you want to know more about Byzantium, I highly recommend. I don't recommend you necessarily buy the 3-volume John Julius Norwich, but the short history is a little bit more affordable. I've
seen that. Yeah,
it's very good. Like I said, very witty, chatty. He's kind of it's gossipy. It's fun, right? I wouldn't recommend it as a primary text if someone was like trying to make a serious study of Byzantium, but who cares about that? Like, I want the fun details.
Absolutely.
And then when later today, I was going to put together a list of books that are available at the Vermillion Public Library, just for easy access. So that'll go out with the video that goes along with this.
Would I be able to get those through Yankton Library?
You could get them through there. If they don't have them there, they can place an interlibrary loan request. And
okay, that'd be great.
Yep.
Okay. And and if you have anything else you think of, I don't know what possibly, just email Rochelle, and Rochelle will get it to me. But I'm going to go ahead. Like I said, I got to drop off, and because I need to go and refresh my coffee, because I'm only on my 5th cup today. And I got a meeting. So thank you all so much for coming. Thank you, Gary and Cindy. It was great to kind of hear.
Thank you. You brightened up the week.
Absolutely. Agreed.
I'm glad. I hope you all have a great weekend, and everyone take care. Thanks
You
for
too.
coming.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Rochelle. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.